meeting of the policy committee to order. It is 4:32 p.m. on July 12th. First item is the Pledge of Allegiance. I'll give you a second to get the flag up. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America
and to the
republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay, the next item is the approval of the agenda.
I move we approve the agenda.
Second.
Okay, motion made by Ms. Kathy Robine, seconded by David Stribinger. Any discussion? Don't see any hands up. I'd like to call the vote. Signify by saying aye.
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 Thank you. It's unanimous. Next item. Are there any public?
No public comments.
Okay, so moving along, we have the approval of the May 10th committee meeting minutes. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Kathy Robine, seconded by David Stribinger. Any discussion? Seeing no hands raised. I'll call the vote.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
It was unanimous. I see there's someone on the participants list. It's a bunch of numbers and letters. Can we have them identify themselves, please?
I think it's me. This is Ingrid Boatwright, but it's district phone.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ingrid. Molly or Robin, can you change that to reflect Ingrid? Thank you. Okay. Next item is item E, discussion of the requested policies OE 6.16. Bring that up. And we are fortunate enough to have the maker of that original motion sitting on the policy committee. I believe it was Mr. Stribinger. Mr. Stribinger, is that correct?
That's true. That's true.
Great. So this is a request to have this looked at by us and perhaps reworded. Do you have any recommendations for that, Mr. Stribinger?
No, I don't. We have this one, and this arose because there's like $10 million laying around, and so I made this motion because that money needed to get rolled forward into the current bonding cycle and not borrow money when we had 10 million laying around. So that was the impetus for this. Subsequent to this, there was also a motion, I think by Colonel Geyer, about when you close the project out. I think it was after 4 years you had to close it out. So that kind of goes hand in hand with this, because that defines unused. After 4 years, unused. Now this becomes problematic a little bit because of the way we handled 8% funds this year, because we said we weren't going to roll any extra money forward. We were going to roll it down to the next project on the list, which was under the line. And I've thought about that. I don't think it's really a conflict. Okay, we decided that those were our secondary choices. And so there might not be a conflict. I don't know.
Okay. And I think we also have Ms. Fidrich, who's the chair of the operations committee, and I believe there was some discussion there. Correct me if I'm wrong, but perhaps she also has some thoughts on that.
I do. We were talking at the operations committee about
taking some of the contingency funds from fiscal year 18, 19, and 20, and it's going to come up to about $1.4 million and moving it forward to fiscal year 23. And before even making that recommendation, we wanted to make sure it was not in conflict with board policy, which is why we're bringing it forward.
Actually, that's completely consistent with this policy. That's exactly what this policy wants you to do. Roll it forward.
I'm sorry, David, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear what you were saying.
Oh, that might be a blessing.
No, I don't think so.
No, what you just described is exactly what this motion or this policy wants you to do. It wants you to roll that money forward into the current cycle so that it doesn't stay, back as kind of a slush fund, or looks like a slush fund. And it leaves it to someone else's discretion on how to spend it. The whole concept was roll it forward, and that way you don't have to borrow that money because you already have it. So what you just described is exactly in concert with the intent of this.
Mr. O'Brien, I see you have your hand raised.
Yes. So I think, let me just rephrase to make sure that we're all on the same page. So we roll this money forward, and we still have our borrowing limit or whatever for our 8% money at $20 million. But now we have an extra whatever it was million to spend on items in there. We're just not we're using it in the 23 towards the 23 8% projects. Is that a correct restatement? So we're not reducing the amount of money that we're going to borrow. We're just adding this money for additional projects, right?
Yeah, I
Well,
thought
that's exactly the opposite of what.
Yeah.
yeah,
The intent was that you wouldn't borrow money that you already had.
right. So if for example, if I can give a hypothetical or an example, if there was 1 million left over from 2019, and we had already borrowed 20 million for our current bond issuance, it would reduce our bond issuance by $1 million. So we would roll that forward to reduce. It wouldn't become $21 million worth of projects. It would still remain at the 20, but it would reduce our issuance by $1 million.
And I'll let I attended those operation committee meetings, and I'm not sure that's what they intended, but.
Okay. Ms. Fridgers?
Thank you. So that's I was going to go to the second half of this motion, which they reduce the current bond issuance accordingly. So that's exactly right, is that the discussion was not to necessarily reduce the 20 million bond issuance that we do for 8%. I mean, we issue that 20 million bond every year for 8%, even though we have multi-million dollars worth of 8% projects that need to be completed. So the 20 million doesn't allow for all of those projects to be completed. So if we did not reduce the bond issuance accordingly to whatever money we're rolling forward, then we would not be in compliance with this policy, correct?
That's right.
Correct. The key is not to borrow money that you already have.
Right, but is also the key to at what point, I guess, is the 20 million not enough to take care of the projects that are needed to be taken care of?
Well, that's a different issue. If we want to change that 20 to 25, let's go directly at that. This is just a financial discipline, but I don't disagree that maybe that 20 should move up to 25 because it's been 20 for a while. But that's a different target than this policy.
I agree, and that's why I thought that this conversation was also going to be had in the finance committee. Is Is that true, Dr. Wisniewski?
We actually moved this to our next meeting, so we skipped it at our last meeting.
Right. Okay. So because I think that, like David just said, I mean, that's an important part of the conversation. But if we were to go forward with what we had hoped to do in the operations committee, I am hearing from you all that yes, indeed, it would be in violation of board policy.
I think if the intent was to add on to the current bond issuance at 20 and add on like 1 million or whatnot of the unused funds, then technically I think, yes, it would be in conflict. Is that your thoughts too, David?
Yeah, I agree. What I would suggest is if you want to do that, then you make the motion that we change the limit from 20 to whatever. Because obviously I feel strongly about this, because this is a financial discipline I think we need to have, where we don't have extra money laying around. That it's all accounted for. We don't borrow money that we already have. So I would just make the motion that we increase it from 20 to whatever you think is appropriate.
Yeah, I think that there needs to be probably operations may already be doing this, is looking at historical spend and historical ask of what could have been under the line, essentially. Because I think that there's more to it when looking at whether or not it's going to be 20, 25, 30, what have you. Sorry, Madam Chair, I see that your hand is raised.
Yeah, to addressing this specific topic. So the public's aware too. The 20 million that we borrow each year to do these projects, there's a limit to that. It's 8% of the total property value assessed in Beaufort County. So I don't know what that number is. Do any of you guys? Do you, David?
I think it's about double that.
Yeah, I was going to say it's substantially higher. I'm pretty certain it is substantially higher too. But I think in the past, it's been recommended to us by our financial advisor, maybe not the most current one, the one we had most currently, Hilltop, but I think by Compass, I think they were recommending that we keep it at the 20 around there, because it just made our finances look better for getting better rates for borrowing, et cetera. So I think it's a question that really should go to the Compass group. Is this something we should consider, or no? It's not in keeping with good finances or whatever.
Right, that's a good point. I see Mr. Melvin Campbell's hand is raised.
Yeah, good afternoon. My thought is, how are we doing in terms of the 8% project? What's the completion rate? What's the list look like? And how does that relate to the 20 million? And then I'd be willing to do, as David suggested, move that 20 million up to something that's more up to date, but also make sure you're spending all the back dollars within that new limit. That's my thought. I think we do need to look at how we're doing with those 8% projects. They keep backing up, then we're really not serving its purpose.
Ms. Probine?
From attending the operations committee meetings, I thought I heard a concern about it. I could be wrong. That so right now it's easy to say we're going to borrow $20 million. If we take this, so we plan for that. And if we take this 1.2 million, put it back in, then we only need to borrow 19 point something million. And that becomes more troublesome. I thought that was one of the reasons, or one of the things that I heard from those meetings. But like I said, I didn't attend all of them. So is there any concern there, Ms. Fidrick?
Yeah.
Dr. Wisniewski? Okay, so yes, it's kind of, the backstory to this is that we did have a joint, finance operations committee meeting, and we did talk about closing out projects and the importance of not having that fund like David Stribinger just mentioned. We did talk about the fact that being able to predict what your 8% borrowing is going to be is important. So you know that it's 20 million, it's not 18.2 this year, and it is 19.6 next year because of the closed out and the funds that are then rolled back, and then the bond is reduced accordingly. So there are some varying factors that play into this. I like the suggestion, and this is why I was bringing this forward, is before we even from the operations committee talk about rolling forward these funds, I wanted to make sure that there was the policy was well understood by all, and that we weren't in violation of it. So I think if we do, if finance could look at this from the financial aspect and bring forward a recommendation, this $20 million, from what I understand, has been the borrowing amount for years and years and years. And it is based on the assessed value of property in the county. 8% is much greater than the 20 million, but we have limited to that. And to Mr. Mel Campbell's question, open up that binder and you are going to see the dozens and dozens of projects that have been requested. And it's every year with the 20 million, it's the safety and security ones that bubble to the top as they should, and the other ones keep getting pushed further and further back. So, once again, Mr. Stribinger, I think has a very valid point, but I would very much like to hear what the Finance Committee says about this as well.
Mr. Earl Campbell?
Yes. We were advised by our financial advisor before that we should keep it at 20 million. And so I think maybe what we should do is wait and get a recommendation from him before we do it today. So that's just my.
Ms. Robine?
Sorry, I neglected to take my hand down.
Oh, you're fine. Dr. Glatz? I think you're muted.
Ms. Boatwright's hands up as well.
So my thoughts were just what Earl just said and what I said earlier is I really think we need this, if we're going to start changing that 20 million ceiling, that really needs to come from our financial advisor now. And I was trying to find the document that they provided a few years ago that showed how long we've had the 20 million as the cap. And I think I would guess off the top of my head, it's somewhere between about maybe 5 to 7 years, but I was trying to find that. And I think I can find it in a few minutes here.
Ms. Boatwright, did you have something?
Sorry, no, I did have my hand up, and I thought that Ms. Fidrich covered what I was going to say pretty well.
I was just going to suggest, in order to expedite this and keep this moving, I serve on the Finance Committee, and I know this had been moved to our next meeting's agenda. I certainly could make an ask of the committee and of our CFO to have the financial advisors at our next meeting, and perhaps get some questions bounced off of them ahead of it coming back to the full board. So if everybody, unless anybody has any objections to that, I certainly could do that. And I think the reason perhaps in the past why they had recommended we not raise it is because of our total debt capacity. Is that your understanding as well, Madam Chair?
Yeah, and I'm actually yes, I believe, I think it was for financial reasons, because I'm looking at my notes from, this is Brian Nurick's presentation on April 23rd, 2019. Mm-hmm. And the 8%, they were limiting it to 20 million issuance per year with a 4-year payback. And then if you look at his his debt service structure report, you got 20 million in 23, but it actually gradually, he had 22 million in 24 on this structured report. So he was anticipating it going up.
Okay. Well, I'll shoot an email over to try to get some more information for us at the finance committee, and ask kind of what does that issuance look like, if it could be expanded or whatnot. Is there anything else on this topic before we close it out? Okay. Moving on. Next item is F, discussion regarding process of approval of interpretation and monitoring indicators of OEs. And I'm trying to recall who this came from. It was, I believe, an email.
Came from Tricia.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ms. Fidrich, I know this was discussed at the full board as well about kind of how are we handling this? What's the process of approval of the superintendent's interpretation of the monitoring indicators? Did you want to add anything else?
Yes, I'm looking for some guidance on how to do it more efficiently than at the last board meeting. Just a little background, there were some OEs that were accepted from the finance committee, but wanted to be sent to the operations committee for some input. So we did that, and then we brought them to the full board. And so some have been accepted, some were not accepted. So do they go back to the committee? Do they go right back to the superintendent? Should we put aside a work session and do all the OEs at once instead of bringing them back piecemeal? I'm just really trying to find a more efficient process so that we don't have the lengthy conversation that we had at the last board meeting. Not that it's not good to have that lengthy conversation, but it didn't seem to be very productive at the time.
Mr. Stribinger?
Thank you. The interpretations of the OE, my opinion is they belong to the superintendent. So if we don't accept them, they go back to the superintendent and he has to modify based on the input we gave him. And on the other part of the question about, I agree, this piecemeal thing, I don't think is working too well. I would like to see a focus on it and have us all go through it. And I know that's going to be arduous. I know it's going to be a long meeting, and I know all of us will get frustrated about some of the questions, but I think that really is the best way to do it, to get the full board to go through and say yes. And that way nobody can kibitz later on. It just seems to be the way to do it. That's my opinion, but they belong to the superintendent, so they always go back to the superintendent for him to modify.
Madam Chair?
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing that David just said, and that is if the board rejects a part of it or all of it or whatever the board rejects, the burden is back onto the superintendent. It's his interpretation that we have to rely on. I don't think it should go back to the committee. I think that I think we're getting, yes, they are very important, and it's important that we agree with the superintendent's interpretation, but I think we're spending, getting into the weeds, I guess is maybe the best word, or the nitty gritty. And especially because this is the first time that we're really having him do this. I think we should have him, this is my opinion, on the consent agenda, because I don't think it's effective, as Tricia's already pointed out. Like, we brought him forward from the operations to the full board, and then basically it's the same discussion again. And so, all the board members need to be prepared, because when they're brought to the board meeting, I think it should be under consent agenda. And if a board member thinks that, oh no, we need to discuss this one further, they can pull it off from consent agenda and we can discuss it further. But I think a big part of it is, I think the burden on us is being prepared and having read through these carefully before we get to the board meeting, not just winging it at the board meeting and having a discussion and all that. And I just, you know, I just see it being so burdensome to do, you know, like an all-day affair, special called meeting or something. I just think whittling away at it little by little is probably better. And why not in a year from now? I know Dick feels the same way because I think he said this publicly too. You know, a year, okay, if a year from now, this one, OE6, you know, oh, this section of it didn't work too well, let's tweak that. I mean, I think that would be probably a better way to do it. I'd say just let's get them in place and, you know, as best we can and work with them. And I think we'll have a better idea after a year has gone by of, you know, what needs tweaking and what doesn't need tweaking. But that's just my opinion.
Thank you. Ms. Boatright?
Hey, yeah, I kind of just have an opinion too, but I was just confused. I wasn't involved in the policy making, and I know you guys did just tremendous amounts of work and research and meetings. So I'm coming at it all fresh and bushy-tailed. Like, but one of the things that came up in operations is if there are, you know, there's only 3 people on a committee, and if someone is asking for a policy to be interpreted in such a way that might fundamentally change the policy, my thoughts are, I guess it would then just go to the board for, that's kind of what happened, is it went to the board for a lot of discussion. I don't know if it'd be better, because this was one of the things discussions we had in the operations committees. We'd gotten this policy from finance to operations. Did it need to go to policy before it went to the full board? So I don't know, it might be worth looking at if there's a way to kind of streamline the process or build consensus on it, because there are going to be situations, I think, where the interpretation is valid, but people might say, well, that's not what I meant. And then you get back into policy. So it just seems like it's a circular argument. If there's a way, like Ms. Fidrich said, to just sort of be efficient about it and have consensus, I think would be good.
Yeah, I agree. It's a bit of a sticky situation just because some of, and I think when we get into the interpretation and well, that's not how we meant for it to be. I know that there's some policies that came and were new out of finance committee and came directly from the recommendation of senior staff. So some of those came to us because we just didn't even know that we needed those. So they came through finance and then went to policy and then went to the full board. So in cases like that, I'm not really sure what the appropriate answer is. I tend to agree with Dr. Gwads and that putting these on consent agenda and, you know, us doing our due diligence and reviewing them prior to the meeting is what makes most efficient sense. And if there's something we don't agree on, then we just pull it off and discuss it. The one thing I do see that is kind of lingering or remaining out there on the interpretation and monitoring indicators is the monitoring dates or the frequency areas. And I'm not sure.
That's the work plan.
And that's what I was going to ask is that going to be a whole nother discussion of making sure that it aligns with the work plan, or is that already going to just be input by default? Robin, you may know.
That monitoring would go on to the work plan, so that becomes the work plan. So however they determine and the board says, I want to see this, like for instance, the financial report, we know that's quarterly. So that is on the work plan to come quarterly. But if the FOIA report, the board requested that to be every month. So some of those things are automatically that you have already requested, that comes on the work plan. The other monitoring, I don't know if that's Dr. Rodriguez's recommendation saying that this should come because he knows when test date, you know, they know when test dates are available. They know when, so those would come from them to put on the work plan. And at the work session in August is when we're supposed to approve that. So maybe that's when you would sit there and say you agree or you don't agree or whatever at that time.
Dr. Glatz?
Yeah, Dr. Rodriguez indicated that he's going to bring forward at that August work session his recommendations for the work plan, just as Robin explained too, because, you know, he knows, for example, when the test scores become available, et cetera. So I think he's going to give us a reasonable calendar, and we can then tweak it if we need to. And so Robin, you just mentioned FOIA's monthly, but isn't FOIA quarterly?
Quarterly.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Very good.
Some new ones on there too that, you know, he probably knows when those contracts and when the
Yeah.
services and things come in. So, okay. Ms. Boatright?
Sorry, I forgot to take my hand down.
No problem. So, does anybody on the committee want to make a recommendation to the full board on what we think the process of approval should look like? Or you just want me to report back kind of what some of the ideas were? Nothing? Ms. Robine?
Yeah, so, you know, I would agree with, putting the items on consent agenda and, you know, depending on people to do their homework. I do think that, most likely the items will be pulled off. I think that, chances are pretty good that anything we put on consent agenda regarding the OEs will be pulled off. So you know, I don't know if it would be a futile attempt to do that. I do think, you know, we are so much further ahead now than we were before. From my idea, you know, before we had the PEs, there wasn't any interpretation. The interpretation was the report we got. So now I feel like, you know, we're much further ahead. And part of me is kind of like, I agree that we should, as much as we can, let it play out. And then if there are issues as it plays out, we make note of that and address them at that time or address them later. But those just my thoughts.
Mr. Scrivener?
Thank you. I move that the committee recommend to the full board that OE interpretations go on the consent agenda after coming out of committee.
I'll second that.
Okay, any discussion? And Robin, did you get all that?
I'm typing. I move that the committee recommend to the full board that the OEs go on consent agenda after coming out of committee. Is that?
It was OE interpretation.
OE interpretations, yeah.
Coming out of
Policy committee. You got to add policy. I think.
No, it's coming out of,
Yeah, come out of finance, they can come out of any committee.
No, but you started out, Robin started out the, I shouldn't.
I move that the policy committee recommend, is that
there we
what you
go.
mean? Okay.
Yeah, that's exactly. Thank you.
The OE interpretations go on consent agenda after coming out of committee. Is that it?
Ma'am.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's David and Kathy. Got it.
And then, are we just leaving it up to the superintendent to route it to the appropriate committee? That it's
The
gonna-
interpretations?
Yes,
Yeah, I think, well, that's the way it's been happening, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
just making sure we're still following that.
yeah.
Okay. Any other, Dr. Glatz?
I was just going to say the same thing that Kathy did, that, yeah, that is the way it's happening, is the superintendent is routing them to the appropriate committee and his staff.
Yeah.
Any other discussion on this before we vote? Seeing no hands, I'll call the vote. Signify by saying aye, please.
Aye.
Aye.
Unanimous. Okay. Great. So the next item is discussion of future meeting dates. Let's see. Robin, do we have a date available in August? I know that we have that work session, isn't that right?
The work session is the 27th. You have the 9th of August, if you want to continue it on a Monday afternoon.
Just wondering if we're going to have anything that will have been routed to us. Well,
And I'll have the handbook for you so that you can see it before we have the work session.
okay. Is the 9th available for anyone earlier on in the day? Or is that a problem?
Yeah, after, well, yeah.
I mean, that whole week, let's see.
Yeah, with this much notice, I can make it pretty much any time. I just need a couple weeks, notice. So I am in town then. I'm out of town a lot in August, but I'm in town on the 9th, so.
Mr. Strivenger, does 11:30 or 12 work for you?
Well, sure, if you bring lunch.
Okay.
That's fine.
Okay. Robin, is that okay with you?
Yes, there's nothing on that day.
Okay.
So you want it 11:30 or 12?
Let's do 11:30 because hopefully we won't run too late and run through lunch.
So August 9th at 11:30.
Yes, ma'am.
Got it.
And then we'll just roll whatever comes at us in the next coming weeks to that date.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. If no one has anything else, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I move we adjourn.
Thank you, everybody.
All right, thanks.